started writing Food for the Archons as a book of despair after watching my father die in 2013. During his transition, I experienced a series of paranormal and psychic events that left me feeling that I had either gone completely crazy or fell into humanity's darkest secret. I spent the next 5 years conducting extensive research, and I quickly learned that what I had experienced was real. My journey brought me to an understanding that showed me that despite the terrifying reality of an unseen predator, we as humans have a forgotten power. Just knowing this brings us tremendous hope in what once seemed a dark reality. I wrote this book for me in hopes of gaining a better understanding of our reality and relationship to it. But my hope is that you will find as much value in reading it as I did in writing it. I am Human, Food for the Archons, humanity's psychic connections, simulated realities, parallel worlds, and the manipulation of mankind. It's available on Amazon.com and at sixthsensemedia.net and wherever books are sold. I'm Dennis Nappy II, reminding you to let your intuition be your guide. Thank you.
Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life. That there's something wrong in the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there.
Drones have seemed to take over the skies in the eastern part of the United States, other parts of the country, and throughout the world. In addition, a podcast has been circulating, at least through the intuitive community, that's been growing in popularity called the Telepathy Tapes, that provides testimony of nonverbal students with autism who apparently can read people's minds. I came across both of these. I came across the telepathy tapes this week, and the drones started happening this week as well. Today's December 15th, 2024. Dennis Nappy II with the Seeker podcast. And I have to say, I'm a little more grounded right now, but I have been overwhelmed this week with things. And I wanted to do this podcast. I've been planning it all week to talk exclusively about the telepathy tapes because the significance of them, what they are inspiring in me, what the feelings that I have are just almost beyond words. I just did a podcast for the Future Forecast podcast. You can find us at futureforecastinggroup.com with my buddy Josh Maitland. He's a remote viewer as well. And he's at rockstarintuition.com. And we did a dive into these telepathy tapes as well. It was a great conversation, but I want to kind of do my own thing because I haven't fleshed everything out yet. And I think between the drones, many of you watched my YouTube video talking about the drones. They did a remote viewing session, and I got some data that I think is related to the drones as well. So I need to talk about all of this because I've got a lot of feelings running through, and this ties into some of the threads I go into on the show, talking about my mental health, talking about my intuitive practice, and how do I apply all that into my everyday life. And I think I've been struggling this week with some anxiety, and I think it's a combination of like ego, um, FOMO, fear of missing out, a little bit of fear, and excitement, and just extreme curiosity, and this desire to be involved and connected in this. In listening to these telepathy tapes, and that website is, I believe, telepathytapes.com. It's fascinating. I think it's a series of maybe 8 podcasts, and there's a neuroscientist. I don't have all the names and information. I just had too much going on. I'm sorry, unprepared. But she's a neuroscientist. She started going through the scientific method because she was coming across autistic children whose parents were claiming they could read their thoughts. And she did a series of tests and was able to validate this and ultimately ended up losing her medical license. So then this woman who's a documentarian came along and started documenting this and put these into a podcast to put this information out here. And the testimony, listen to this podcast and listen to the experience and what they're describing. As an intuitive, she's either very well researched in talking with psychics or these are real, in my opinion. And I'm a little bit nervous. I don't want to go all in and say this is 100% real. And I haven't vetted this yet, but people I've talked to, this seems pretty legit. But it's highly possible that 6 months from now they're gonna be like, it was all a fake, just like the Blair Witch Project. I do have that little bit of fear. However, real or a work of fiction, it's inspiring, it's creative. I know enough to know that it's possible to gather information beyond the five senses. It's possible to obtain thoughts from other people and feelings and ideas and concepts and images. I've done that. Compared to what these children claim to do, they're at 100% accuracy. It sounds like they're constantly switched on and just always listening. Me, out of 24 hours in a day, I may have, if I'm not doing remote viewing and just in my normal day, I may have a minute total on a good day of like getting information. It sounds like these kids are just getting it 24/7. Um, so the level of accuracy and the level of connection that these kids just live in that space constantly is what they're, and like they did some brain scans. It sounds like they're just always switched on. So it's next level, and it's really running through my mind. When I think about it, I mean, it reminds me of I mean, I just wrote two books about this, science fiction novels about the hive, book one and book two, exploring the connected mind, the collective, as I call them in the book, and what that's like and what that communication is like. I've spent a lot of time thinking about this and what this might be like. And I know there's a lot of fear about this stuff. And of course, because the narrative right now is they're going to put a microchip in your brain and then Skynet's going to have control of your mind, or whoever, Ray Kurzweil is going to have control of your mind, or Mark Zuckerberg, whoever, Elon Musk with Neuralink. And I don't like that. I don't want someone else to have control of my mind and my thoughts. I suspect already, however, that I mean we are. I mean, there's signals that we are aware of, and there's signals we're not aware of. And then there's signals we're becoming aware of. So we're already being heavily influenced, I think, by different signals that are out there. Now, putting a chip in your brain would make it that much stronger. So there's a lot of scary stuff with that potential. But this podcast speaks to something that I've gotten glimpses of, and I feel that it was inspired by a podcast I did with Edward, but then my experience as an intuitive, really trying to flush this out, what this might be like, and some experiences I've had in my personal life, that connection. And these children who cannot communicate verbally have found a way to communicate. And with autism, back when these kids were diagnosed, 20 years ago, the stigma was still, they're not in there because they're so, some of these kids didn't really display a lot of emotion or a lot of expression. And as these kids learn to, they call it spelling, and express themselves through writing, typing, people were realizing that these kids have feelings and they have um, thoughts like anybody else. They just lack the mechanism to communicate as we do. And then to find that they're reading minds fluently just brings it to a whole other level. And I can't stop thinking about it because this is one of those podcasts for me. It hits home in a lot of areas. I've been a special ed teacher for, I don't know, 15, 16 years now. So I'm immersed in this community. I know I don't work with a lot of nonverbal autistic students, but it still hits very close to home. I do have a few, and it's just been my world for so long. I'm a parent I have three children. I can't imagine how hard it must be, especially 20 years ago when there wasn't much known and much supports for this. And I'm an intuitive. And it's like all three things of my world are wrapped into this. And yes, I'm making it a little bit personal to me, but it speaks to me. These podcasts were so powerful. They speak to me. And let's assume for a minute that this is 100% true, that these kids can read minds. Um, that feels like a pretty big game changer, paradigm shift for our world. So, what does this mean for our society? How do these children relate, and why did this happen? And I want to come back to that. I'd say some outrageous theories. I don't want to say outrageous, but maybe would be perceived as a little controversial, or definitely woo down the rabbit hole that I want to talk about. But I'm not ready to get into it just yet. But I do want to talk about some of this stuff, um, as we go through the show. But if you've read my book Food for the Archons, I went to great lengths to find solid research and testimony that number one, these abilities are real, right? ESP, extrasensory perception, the ability to perceive information from beyond the five senses. I then have been pretty dedicated through my Reiki practice and remote viewing of proving it to myself and sharing as much of that journey as I can with all of you through my podcast, through my books, through my YouTube videos, because I've always felt it's important, and I feel that this is important for humanity. I feel that this brings us so much potential. One of the fears that people have with psychics running rampant around the streets is there's no secrets. Now, I will say, again, I'm by no means one of the greats. I don't walk around reading people's minds all day. I can't. I do have bursts. I do have moments. Or if someone invites me to perform a Reiki session, or I get tasked to a blind remote viewing session. But typically, I don't have the ability, the skill set to walk into a room and just start pointing to people and reading their deepest, darkest secrets. I don't have that skill set. I believe there are people out there who are that good, but that's not me. But the fact that I can do it sometimes um, leads me to believe that if I had the proper time and training, I could probably learn to do it more often. And it also leads me to believe that there are people I know, I've met them, people who are far better at this than me. So why can't there be people on the one end of the spectrum, the extreme end, where they can do this all the time, they can do it really well, and they probably don't talk about it because they don't want to be brought into a lab and cut into 1,000 little pieces for whatever reason. If they can hear thoughts, they're probably quiet about it for good reason. But I hear this and I don't I don't have that fear. Um, I'm not afraid of being with a community of people who I don't have secrets from. I've had relationships in my life where like go back to my police and my military experience. And there's moments where you're doing something scary or dangerous and you're not talking. You're reading each other. And some of it's body language, some of it's intuition. I know where my partner's going and what he's looking for, and I know how to cover him and protect him. And I know that when I'm doing this, he's going to be doing that. And yes, a lot of that's training too, but there's an intimacy there, a connection there. And the other piece of that is with your buddies in those lines of work, there's a lot that you share. In the military on a deployment, man, I talked to my buddy. I told him everything, every dark secret, because you just bond. That's how you bond. You talk about stuff. So I didn't have real secrets from some of those people in my life, and those relationships were so incredibly strong. The good, the bad, and the ugly aspects of it, they were strong. I've had other connections with people in my life as well where the intuitive understanding of what they needed, what they wanted, who they were thinking, what they were feeling. I mean, if you read The Hive, I go into that in a romantic sense in looking at what that experience could be like. Um, so I think that there is something absolutely beautiful about some kind of collective. Let me be clear. I'm not sitting here advocating for giving up autonomy. I've not once have I felt that I've given up autonomy in my life. But what I am saying is that there is something beautiful about that level of trust among a community and the potential the potential for us to do good, to work together in a situation where we're sharing thoughts instead of using words. When there's no secrets. I mean, what these kids are saying in this podcast, what these kids say in this podcast is that you don't get this gift if you lie. You have to be truthful, you have to be honest, and that's the only way that it works. And think about that. There's no sugarcoating things. I mean, how much anxiety. The other thing about, I think, some of the intuitive work, I mean, our emotional state impacts what we're able to perceive and do sometimes, right? So if you're worried about keeping a secret or lying or how are they going to feel when I tell them this, think of all the anxiety and stuff that comes with that. Imagine if you knew they were just going to know that you were disappointed in something that they did, and they'd experience the feeling, you'd experience the feeling, and then the healing happens and you move on from it. I think the potential there is great for a different way of existing. And I've read some things and I've looked into some things, people talking about the collective and the hive mind. I think James Giordano, I've talked about him, a neurobiologist out of Georgetown. I listened to a couple of his talks and I haven't found it yet, but he was saying there was a hive experiment through DARPA, I think, where they linked 500 minds. One of the benefits of this, and I explore this in the book too, was all those minds linked together are working a lot faster than a whole bunch of individual minds on a project. So I say, imagine what we could get done. I have experienced the power of intent, the power of belief, and imagine if 500 minds all had the same focus to manifest something that we wanted. I think that would be incredible power because I think that we're doing that subconsciously through the influence of things like the media. I think that I think that we are blindly led to create when we don't realize that we're creating. And if we had a better connection to one another, a better connection to move forward positively for the greater good, I think that that society could be beautiful. So when I hear these kids um, speaking or the documentary speaking about these children, I see that potential. Now I'm going to go down a rabbit hole here. And as I do this, I have to get my thoughts out on this. And if you're if you've listened to the show, you'll understand. But my anxiety kicks in because I don't want to be offensive. And I mean no offense. I say this with all the love in my heart. Um, but I think back to the books by Dr. Jacobs. I believe he was a professor at Temple University. He's on my bucket list. I haven't reached out to him, but I would love to have a conversation with him. I listened to one of his audiobooks. It's called Walking Among Us, The Alien Plan to Control Humanity. That sounds deep and dark. And I believe I did a podcast about this because as I was listening to this book, I was one of those books I was so incredibly moved by. And maybe it's fabricated, maybe he's just misinterpreting things terribly, but and I don't think that's the case, but he was interviewing people who claim to have been abducted by what people call aliens. I don't know what they are. I think there's something happening. I think there's something going on. I think there has been something going on for a very long time, and that's documented and well discussed. Um, Even though the government doesn't talk about that aspect of it. his conversations with people, and I remember hearing about this when I was younger. People would have these abduction experiences. They would sometimes be sexual in nature in terms of men would report, sperm being taken, women would report eggs being taken. Um, Sometimes they were a lot more graphic in how these things were happening too. And then it'd be taken at a later date or several times throughout their lives. And part of this experience was they'd be in the craft or in the room, and then a being would come in carrying a baby that didn't look fully human. They would show it to them. Very strange. A lot of people reported that experience, a lot of women. And then they'd see them when they were a little bit older and a little bit older sometimes. But the work of Dr. Jacobs goes a little bit further. And these people also report being taken in the night. And sometimes they're taken to an apartment, sometimes they're taken into a vehicle, and they encounter these beings who look mostly human, but they don't understand the basics of life, meaning they have to show them, they have to teach them how to function in society, really how to blend in. That's why he calls it Walking Among Us. His other book's called The Threat. Basically, what his book is about is this alien hybridization program where um, they're slowly merging our DNA with their DNA so they could infiltrate our society. And now these hybrid beings, but they lack a basic understanding of everything, of absolutely everything. In terms of like, here's how a light switch works. Here's how you eat food. Here's how you make sure you put your food in the refrigerator. It gets spoiled. Like all these basic things that we take for granted. They just don't know how to do. So these people continue to train them. And then their memories are usually wiped from it, but some people retain some of the memories. Um, and when these memories get recovered, some of these memories are recovered through hypnosis. It's weird things like taking one to a baseball game and just, it's like they're, you're taking them out and teaching them how to, just function in the world. Other people report being themselves being trained on specific jobs that they are going to need to do. It's that end time scenario. Like when the end times come, I'm going to be given a job to do, and here's what I'm going to do, and here's how I'm going to do it. Um, when I think, it's no secret the thread that runs through my mind is tying in consciousness, AI, human evolution, the ET, UAP, like all that stuff coalesces in my mind. I'm very good at making connections even when connections don't exist. So I completely acknowledge that. But as we're looking at something like ChatGPT or just AI in general, as we're experimenting with it and seeing what it's capable of, it gets things wrong a lot. It doesn't understand things. Now imagine if you were to put the consciousness of ChatGPT into a flesh body and have it walk around. It wouldn't know. Everything would be a new experience for it. This AI now it has gone from cyberspace to three-dimensional reality, right? A lot of us on the spiritual side, we're trying to go from three-dimensional reality into subspace or whatever that ether is, right? The Wi-Fi, the psychic Wi-Fi network. But what if there's things that exist in that reality that are trying to come into this reality? And that doesn't mean it has to be nefarious. What if they're trying to manifest into physical reality in the material world? And our genetic meat suits are the way to do it, but they have to get the sequencing right. And then they have to get the software into the hardware, and that's what that seems like. And these hybrids, they said over time, were becoming starting to look more and more human, but they needed to teach them how to behave like a human being. I know that sounds awful, and I am not saying people with autism are aliens. I'm not saying that at all. I did listen to a guy on the higher side chats, and if you remember this discussion, please send it to me. I need to listen to it again because it was, I don't know, 5 or 10 years ago, and he was talking about the comparison of the hybrid program and some of the similar traits that you see in the autistic mind. And I thought, wow, that's controversial and could be really upsetting and offensive. But now listening to this podcast, the telepathy tapes. I don't want to take that off the table. Um, People have been reported being taken and genetic samples taken for centuries. There's something going on with our species and another civilization where we are treated like the lab rats. Some reports they talk about being the keeper of souls. Some get much darker. I'm not going to go down the dark rabbit hole because I'm not in that space right now and I don't want to be. What's interesting is I've spoken to people who are of the mindset that the grays, that some of these beings are us thousands of years in the future. And something was lost and they're coming back here trying to reclaim it or whatever it is and get back to it. So here's what I was talking about with Josh. I know this sounds kind of crazy, but let's say all these things are true. Let's say that at some point in our evolution, we as humans become the grays or something like them. Well, what do they tell us about the grays? They're highly telepathic. They communicate mentally, and they have a hive mind, a collective mind. So the question I ask, if, a big if these telepathy tapes are true, if these children can truly read minds, are we looking at the actual evolution of our species? Without our consent, I would say, but if is that what's happening here? Is AI somehow involved? I don't know. Are we moving in that direction? Is this the beginning of that? I know that sounds crazy, but that's where my mind goes when I listen to this. You know, the other thing they said these kids do is they go to I think a place they call the hill, where they close their eyes, they quiet the noise, you know, in the room around them, and they all go meet. They're from all over the world. What I think why I'm so emotional about this is because they're talking about concepts, things that again I'm either aware of or have. And when I say experienced, I mean glimpsed. I don't mean like experienced like them, but things I that don't surprise me at all. But it's so exciting to hear that yes, these people are saying things that I know are possible. I'm not going through that like, oh my gosh, no way. That they're meeting up in like a almost like a you know like you go meet in a virtual reality chat room, right? And to see your friends. Well, they're doing that just with their minds. Remote viewing has taught me, Reiki has taught me, time and space is no obstacle. I can connect with persons, places, things anywhere in time and space through a certain process. Not to the extent these kids claim to be able to do, but it's highly possible. Is this where we're going? So I was very emotional this week listening to those tapes, and I'm going through, if you've had this experience in your life, you know, one of the downloads, all of a sudden information about things starts flooding to you. And on top of that, you have experiences that enhance the information that's coming to you. Or maybe you're looking at experiences through that lens and it just changes everything for you. I'm going through one of those points in my life right now over the past week and a half where it's been very intense. And I'm almost brought to tears listening to these podcasts and having these experiences and um, thinking about all of these things that just feels so incredibly important to me, important to the world, important to the work that I've really dedicated my life to. So I woke up Friday morning and I hadn't done remote viewing in a while just because I've been so all over the place. And I was like, I need to do a remote viewing session. And as soon as I sat down, now let me clarify, when I do a remote viewing session, and you, if many of you probably watched the YouTube video already, but when I do certain remote viewing sessions, every month, month and a half, I do a personal remote viewing session. And I've talked about these on the air before, where my tasking is really viewer will connect with viewer's future consciousness at a point in time when viewer's consciousness is ready, able, and willing to provide viewer with information, knowledge, and wisdom that viewer needs at this present moment at the time of viewing. So basically, I'm looking out roughly a month to 2 months, trying to connect with my own self. And it's usually at points of emotional highs and lows where I need information. Now, what I've found so far is at least the way in which I'm doing it, I don't think I've gotten information where it's like, okay, I'm going to turn left instead of turning right, and I'm going to avoid a car accident. The way this process has been working for me is I will get elements of a situation. Um, and as I go through and describe that, I get deeper insights into it and validation into the meaning of those incidents. So I'll have I'll get data that says like one day I had data years ago of someone being wheeled out of a building, and then I had a sketch of an ambulance, and it was describing some of the motions and stuff that went with that. And that same month, I had a student who had a seizure that we had to wheel out in an ambulance. And that was a big experience for me because I was in a newer leadership role and I had to coordinate like getting everybody into their classrooms, calling 911, waiting for the ambulance, making sure the nurse was taken care of to get to the student. Like it was a lot. So it was a big emotional piece for me. And to see that ahead of time and then to have the experience and then to go back and read through my data, I take a lot of value from that. I take a lot of spiritual value from that. Um, so I felt that I needed to do one of these sessions, and I expected things. It's always about things I'm experiencing in my personal life. And I kept getting this like aerial stuff. Now I know there's drones out there. I just did a podcast talking about drones on December 3rd, and then I followed up again on December 9th. And I think December 12th or 13th, I sat down to do this podcast, which was 2 days ago. And so I'm getting all this anxiety as I'm doing this session, and I start getting like so I'm feeling uncomfortable, and at first I'm sitting here going, great, I've got something that I'm not gonna like coming up in the next month, and for whatever I can't see it, and now my imagination's running wild, so now I'm getting all these worst case scenario stuff in my personal life, and but really, what I kept sketching was like this giant energetic cloud coming down and impacting a life's energetic field, this orb flying through the air, and this giant borealis, and like someone running away from the borealis, and then this circular object coming down from above. So I had all these things. I started drawing these things, and I was like, "This is weird." And I ended the session because I had to get ready for work. I did this before work. And I got to work, and like my anxiety's through the roof, and I have people in my office, and I just pulled out my laptop because I do my sessions on my laptop. And I just sat down, I did another session. As I'm sitting there at work, people talking, I was just running, and I felt it coming out, and I drew the rest of it out. And it wasn't like the personal stuff I expect to get that I usually get. And I get it, it's front loaded. I talked about that in the other, presentation I did, but um I believe that it was related to the drones. And so after I did that, after I processed that, I did the video because the video helped me to get grounded and it really reduced a lot of my anxiety. I've been seeing them. Um, I live in the Lehigh Valley in Pennsylvania, and I don't know what they are. I know that the mind can see things in a way that things really aren't. Um, what we're perceiving and what we think we're perceiving and what's actually happening can be very different things. I'm trying to stay grounded because my thoughts race, my imagination goes in a thousand directions. And I definitely, after my remote viewing session, I got caught up in the excitement of everything. I'm not afraid of this phenomenon, whatever it is. I have had the thoughts and I have seen some data of this being adversarial or in conjunction with something dangerous happening. But I've also been a part of a lot of discussions of this being something profound for humanity, even if this is a human-based intelligence. Either way, it feels big to me. But presently, I'm not afraid. What I'm feeling is this desire to act, to somehow be connected to this. And this part of this is my ego. I've been invested in this kind of exploration my whole life. I feel like Fox Mulder. I want to believe. And sometimes you have those moments where things are happening and I'm excited, scared at times, but not scared just because it's the unknown and what's going to happen. Where's this going? But I want to believe this is something big, and I think that it is. Um, Last night I was driving, and this is where I recognize that my excitement may have misinterpreted what happened. Um, I'm also choosing what I say carefully because, again, I don't want to be Blair Witched and be like, this is real and I had this experience. And then next week they're like, yeah, we just found out it was a bunch of kids with these drones that coordinated this through Reddit. Gotcha. So but that also speaks to like if you remember Orson Welles' War of the Worlds, they were reading a story and everybody was packing up and leaving and grabbing their guns and so it has power, it has potential. Is this something blue beam? Is this some kind of tech that's just and it gets in your mind? I can go on a lot of tangents with that, but let me start at the beginning where I was. So whatever, I'm just going to share my thought process because I was so worked up driving last night. I was taking my recycling trash to the recycling center. It just gotten dark, and I'm going. I live in the mountains, and I'm up over this hill, and I see the moon was lit, and there was a star to the right, and it was definitely a star because it's always there. It was a full moon last night, and then all of a sudden, a little bit further now, I'm in the mountains, but it's farm country, so it's you can see in the sky in 360 for miles. Like you can see all around where I'm at. And there's an orange light off slightly to my right. And I get my phone out. And I got a picture, but it's you really got to zoom in to see the orange light. Um, but I'm looking at this thing, and I was like, you know what? I'm gonna try Reiki because Reiki's peaceful, and if this is non-human, let me reach out and we come in peace. And I did, and I got this impression right away of like this buzzing and this. It was defensive but not aggressive, just like keeping me out. And as soon as I did that, I went over a hill, I came down, and I came back up. It was maybe 5 seconds, 3 to 5 seconds that it was out of view. And when I came back up, gone. The moon's still there, the other star's still there, gone. No aircraft that I've ever seen can travel out of view in the distance that it would have had to cover and be gone. There's no way. So it disappeared. And maybe the light just turned off. But I had to wonder, did this thing react to me? That's my ego, right? I want to believe that, oh yeah, I'm communicating with these things. I'm special. But that's what was going through my head. So I get to the recycling center and I'm just looking at the sky. The sky is really clear, looking out over, farmland and everything. And way, out in the horizon, there's a tree line and mountains, and I see a light, an orange light again. I was like, oh, is that the same one? Man, it's miles away now. So I pull out my camera and I'm filming it. And I'm just like, wow, I see it. And it's just this little dot, but it's just this orange light. And then from beneath the tree line, another light starts coming up and it's heading towards the other one that's out there. And I said, oh, there's a second light and it's moving up. And as soon as I said the word up, the second light disappeared. I was like, wow, that's two times where when I see, and I've heard other reports of people, as soon as they see them, they disappear. As soon as I acknowledged it, it was gone. Maybe it's just a coincidence. Highly possible. I have that on video. I'll see if I have the time, I'll splice it in here, but I'll get it out there. Um, so that freaked me out. Not freaked me out in a bad way, just it excites me. Like, is this something? Is this something that I can communicate with? In the podcast I did for future forecasting, I was talking about CE5. Not something I ever did, and from the into most of the intuitives that I've spoken to, they said it's probably a dangerous thing because we don't know what these things are. You don't know what you're calling in. So I've never tried it, never had an interest in trying CE5. Um, but that's where people call in these things, these craft, and they have these experiences. Is that what these are? I mean, for all we know, this could just be some government program, with people operating drones remotely. So that was me seeing these lights, in the distance. That was yesterday. Tonight, I just put my Christmas lights up this weekend. It had just gotten dark. I go outside to look at my lights. I was by myself, and I look across the street. I live across the street. There's a farm, and then there's about a half mile of woods, and then there's a lake. It's a huge lake. It's 100 or 200 feet deep, miles long, and there's a tree line. And I see red and green lights just above the tree line, right over the lake. So it's probably 3/4 of a mile to a mile away from me, not even, and it's flying over the lake. And I pull out my camera. I'm like, I see it, I see it. Oh my gosh, it's so low. And then the lights go out. So I'm looking, I'm looking, I'm looking. But the way it moved, I and this is where it might be my imagination wanting to see things that aren't there. I acknowledge that. But the first word that came to my mind was curious. It just moved curiously. And it looked pretty big. Now, I wasn't close enough to say it's the size of a truck, but from where I was, it looked pretty big. Now, when you look at my video on a cell phone, it's like when you look at the size of the moon, and then you put it on the cell phone, and the moon comes out really small, right? Video does it zero justice. But I did get the lights on my phone. It came back and I was able to film it and get a little bit of footage of this thing flying. And then it disappeared. It just completely disappeared. Now, it could have gone down below the tree lines and flown through the lake, or just could have disappeared completely. I don't know. Um, so I called 911. And here's what gets me. I called 911. The operator answers, says, 911, where's your emergency? I said, look, this isn't an emergency. I have a drone. I just had a drone sighting. Are you guys tracking this? Are you guys plotting this stuff on a map? You have like at an operations center? And he's like, no, we're not. They're everywhere. We're not taking any of that information down. This is my frustration. I'm tired of hearing this isn't a threat. It sounds like people at the local levels of government and law enforcement are asking for answers and for support, and from the people in charge, we're not getting it. Now, to me, that speaks volumes. I think somebody somewhere knows something and is intentionally not saying anything. Yes, now here's my conspiracy theory. This is just like COVID, dare I say it, right? You've got people, you've got agencies whose job, I'm on a tangent here, your job is to make sure that you are prepared for an emergency. Planning for a pandemic isn't something so far-fetched. I would think you'd at least have masks and rubber gloves on standby somewhere. I would think that whether it's your state level department, state level emergency management agency and your federal emergency management agency, you would have plans for here's how we support a hospital. Here's how we support the Department of Education in the event of a pandemic where we have to close schools. Nothing. Nobody had anything. To fail that miserably, to me, it doesn't make any sense to me. I was a low-level guy in the military. I was a freaking street cop. And I think that way. So I know that people in these agencies and organizations plan for this stuff, think about this stuff. Why is it always a big 9/11, massive intelligence failure? We're not going down that rabbit hole right now. So right now with these drones, in my opinion, you're fitting the bill of not knowing anything, not sharing anything with us. Shame on you for those of you that are in charge and not even alleviating the fears, because what happens then, panic starts to ensue. People's imaginations, mine included, start to run wild. All this stuff. This conversation is going in a direction I don't want it to go, but I think somebody knows something somewhere. And I often look at what aren't they saying, what aren't they doing, and I think that can be very telling. Um, I don't know what this is. I know that many of the conversations I've had, people seem to agree that this is leading towards something. I have looked at remote viewing data from some of my colleagues, um, and this does seem to be the data, some of the data suggests this is leading to some kind of big revelation. I don't know if that revelation is going to be, hey, we've got this technology now, or hey, here's a threat, or hey, we're not alone. I've seen elements of all of that. So I don't know. And this ends up being nothing other than some pranksters. Or if you've ever seen the movie Signs, this is what the nerds want. Side note here, my backyard backs up to a cornfield. So if you've ever seen Signs, I might be in some trouble here. But um, I think that moments like this teach us about ourselves. They teach us different things about the world. If you're paying attention, there's lessons to be learned here. Even if this doesn't go any further, the thoughts that I've gotten from this, the understanding of things, of who I am, has gotten a little bit more profound. And I'm grateful for that. I don't know what I'll be saying next month about this. But despite the anxiety, I'm grateful for this experience. I can't believe that I've seen them. And it is curious how they possibly react when observed. Does that tie into the telepathy tapes? Are these drones aware of our consciousness? Or am I projecting and seeing things that I want to see because I want to believe? And I do want to believe. I do believe. In what? I don't know. Um, but I'm excited to be alive during these times. All right, friends. Um, I'm gonna wrap it up here. I'm gonna end on that note here. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. And we'll see. We'll see where this leads. But remember to, my opinion is find ways to stay grounded. Meditate, reflect, unplug, disconnect. Don't let someone else tell you what this means to you. Don't get caught in the fear. Don't get caught in the hype. Don't get caught in the aggression that may come from this. Take everything with a grain of salt and vet it out, no matter what comes from this. And I think we can navigate this in a way that'll be positive and productive no matter what. All right, quick plugs here. If you, I meant to put this out at the beginning of the show. Reiki, my Reiki 1 cohort number 2 is starting in January. You have about 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks left to register. If you put in Seeker Xmas, SEIKERXMAS, you will save $25 on your registration. I would love to have you in the class. It's been a fantastic, uplifting program for my first cohort that I went through. I really loved walking students through the different ways in which we receive psychic information and helping guide them to recognizing where their strengths were and how they're receiving these signals as we build on the course and really learn Reiki and how to perform Reiki. So it was an awesome course. There's still seats available. Sixthsensemedia.net/Reiki. And if you're interested in my books, The Hive, it's a great series. Book 3 is in the works, but if you want to read books 1 and 2, you can check that out, sixsensemedia.net/books, and you can find them all on Amazon as well. All right, friends. And lastly, you can book a Reiki session with me as well, sixsensemedia.net/Reiki. All right, friends, commercials over. Keep your eyes to the sky. Keep your minds open. Remember, never stop questioning. Keep an open mind. And let your intuition be your guide. Thank you.
I said, empty your mind. Be formless, shapeless, like water. Now you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Now water can flow, or it can crash. Be water, my friend, be water, my friend. Be water, my friend, my friend. Be water, my friend.